The dust swirled up from Main Street like angry spirits, coating everything in a fine layer of brown grit. Willow Creek was just another frontier town carved out of the harsh Wyoming territory, where the sun beat down mercilessly and the wind carried more sand than sense. Wooden storefronts lined the single dirt road, their painted signs already fading under the relentless assault of weather and time. Horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails swishing at flies, while wagons creaked past loaded with supplies from back east. It was market day, and the town square buzzed with activity. Farmers hawked their produce, women examined bolts of fabric, and children darted between the adults' legs like minnows in a stream. The air rang with the sounds of commerce haggling voices, chickens squawking in their crates, the blacksmith's hammer ringing against his anvil. Through this chaos walked a solitary figure, her head bowed beneath a worn bonnet, her steps quick and purposeful. Eleanor Hartley clutched her basket close, as if it could shield her from the stares that followed her like wolves tracking wounded prey. "There she goes," muttered Mrs. Patterson to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "The ugly bride herself." The words cut through the market noise like a knife through butter. Eleanor's shoulders tensed, but she kept walking. She'd heard it all before, every whisper, every cruel joke, every child's frightened gasp when they saw her face. The scar ran from her left temple down to her jaw, a twisted rope of flesh that pulled at the corner of her eye and mouth. A childhood accident with a wild horse had left its permanent mark, transforming what might have been a pleasant face into something the townsfolk couldn't bear to look upon directly. They called her monster, cursed, devil-marked. But Ugly Bride was the name that stuck, born from the most humiliating day of her life. She'd been 19 then, dressed in her mother's wedding gown, standing at the altar of the small church. The whole town had gathered to witness the union of Eleanor Hartley and Thomas Morrison, but Thomas never came. He'd taken one look at her the night before, really looked at her in the lamplight, and fled town on the midnight stage. The wedding dress still hung in her closet, a ghost of dreams that would never be. A group of boys near the general store noticed her approach. "Ugly bride! Ugly bride!" they chanted, dancing around her in a cruel circle. One picked up a small stone, weighing it in his palm. "That's enough, boys," came a deep voice from the shadows of the store's porch. The children scattered like quail, and Eleanor looked up to see who had spoken. A stranger stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the rough clothes of a mountain man. His dark beard was thick but well-kept, and his eyes, storm-gray and steady, watched the fleeing boys with disapproval. Eleanor quickly looked away, hurrying past. She'd learned long ago that men's interventions usually came with a price, and she had nothing left to give. At the vegetable stand, she selected carrots and potatoes with practiced efficiency, keeping her scarred side turned away from the vendor. Mr. Chen, the Chinese grocer, was one of the few who treated her with basic courtesy, though even he avoided looking at her directly. $2, Miss Eleanor, he said quietly, wrapping her purchases in brown paper. She counted out the coins carefully. Money was always tight. The small income from selling eggs and taking in mending barely kept her fed and sheltered. No one wanted to hire the ugly bride for proper work. Bad luck, they said. Cursed. As she turned to leave, her basket caught on the edge of the stand, sending vegetables tumbling into the dirt. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather them before they were trampled. Her bonnet fell back, exposing her scar to the harsh sunlight. A woman gasped. "Lord have mercy, it gets worse every time I see it." "Mama, is she a witch?" a small voice piped up. "Hush, child, don't look at her." Eleanor's hands shook as she grabbed for the last potato. A large, sun-browned hand reached it first, placing it gently in her basket. She looked up to find the mountain man kneeling beside her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling her bonnet forward and struggling to her feet. He rose with her, his height making her feel small and fragile, unlike the others. He didn't look away from her face. His gaze was direct, but not cruel, studying her with the same careful attention he might give to reading animal tracks or weather signs. "You're welcome," he said simply. Eleanor clutched her basket and fled, her heart pounding. Behind her, she could hear the townsfolk closing in on the stranger like buzzards on fresh meat. "You best stay away from that one, mister," Jake Sullivan advised, spitting tobacco juice into the street. "She's bad luck walking. They say the devil marked her as his own." "That's so?" The stranger's voice held no inflection. "Gospel truth. She was to be married once, but the groom took one look at her in daylight and ran for the hills. Can't say I blame him. That face would curdle milk. She got a name besides what you call her?" "Eleanor Hartley, but everyone knows her as the Ugly Bride. Lives out past Cooper's Ridge in that old shack her daddy left her. Keeps to herself mostly, which is best for everyone." The mountain man said nothing more, but his gray eyes followed Eleanor's retreating figure until she disappeared around the corner. Then he turned back to his business, purchasing ammunition, salt, flour, and a new whetstone for his knife. The shopkeeper, eager for the sale, chattered about the town, the weather, the Indian troubles to the north. "You planning to stay in these parts, mister?" Jameson asked, tallying up the purchases. "Got a cabin up on Thunder Mountain. Come down when I need supplies." "Thunder Mountain? That's harsh country. Most folks don't last a winter up there." A slight smile creased the stranger's weathered face. "Most folks aren't me." He loaded his supplies onto a sturdy pack horse and headed out of town without another word. But at the edge of Main Street, he turned to look back toward Cooper's Ridge, where a small figure in a faded dress was just visible, climbing the dusty path to a weathered shack. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Soon the coyotes would sing their evening song, and the town would shut its doors against the dangers of the night. But for now, in this moment between day and darkness, a mountain man stood watching an ugly bride make her lonely way home. And something shifted in the cosmic order of Willow Creek, something as subtle and inevitable as the changing of seasons. He mounted his horse and rode toward the mountains, but his thoughts remained with the woman whose eyes had held such profound sadness, whose shoulders bore the weight of a world's cruelty. He'd seen many things in his years in the wilderness: grizzly bears and wolf packs, blizzards that could freeze a man's blood in his veins, avalanches that could bury whole valleys. But he'd never seen courage quite like that quiet woman showed, walking through that gauntlet of hatred every time she came to town. The mountain man had a name, though few in town had bothered to ask it. Caleb McAllister had come to the territories to escape his own past, to find solitude in the harsh embrace of the mountains. But sometimes, he reflected as his horse picked its way up the rocky trail, a man found things he wasn't looking for. Sometimes the very thing you fled from circled back around to find you in a different form, as the lights of Willow Creek faded below him and the stars began their nightly dance. Caleb made a decision. He would come to town again soon, and when he did, he would see Eleanor Hartley not as the town saw her, not as the ugly bride, the cursed woman, the monster, but as she truly was. For Caleb McAllister had learned long ago that the only real monsters were the ones that lived in men's hearts, feeding on fear and cruelty. And sometimes, the greatest beauty was found in the places others feared to look. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, and Eleanor Hartley rose from her narrow bed as she had every morning for the past 7 years. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet as she moved through the familiar routine, stoking the fire in the wood stove, heating water for washing, pulling on her faded work dress and sturdy boots. Her small homestead sat on a windswept rise overlooking the valley, far enough from town that she could almost pretend the world beyond didn't exist. The house wasn't much, 2 rooms with a leaking roof and drafty walls. But it was hers. Her father had built it with his own hands when he'd first come west, full of dreams about farming and fortune. Those dreams had died with him 5 years ago, leaving Eleanor with 60 acres of stubborn land and a flock of chickens. She stepped outside into the cool morning air, breathing in the scent of sage and dust. The chicken coop stood nearby, already alive with clucking and scratching. Eleanor scattered feed, counting heads automatically. 23 hens and 1 ornery rooster who ruled his domain like a feathered tyrant. "Morning, ladies," she murmured, checking the nesting boxes. 15 eggs today, a good haul. She'd take them to town tomorrow, along with the carrots and turnips from her garden. If she was lucky, she'd make enough to buy flour and coffee to last the week. The sun crested the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and purple. It was beautiful, this harsh country, in a way that most people couldn't appreciate. Eleanor had learned to find solace in the vast emptiness, in the way the wind sang through the canyon walls and the eagles circled overhead. But solitude had a price, sometimes. In the darkest hours of night, the memories crept in like unwanted guests. She was kneading bread dough when the past ambushed her, her hands stilling as the familiar pain washed over her. 3 years ago today. The date was carved into her heart like her scar was carved into her face. The church had been decorated with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, and columbine she'd gathered herself. Her mother's dress had been altered to fit, the ivory silk yellowed with age, but still beautiful. The whole town had turned out, eager to witness what they assumed would be a disaster. After all, who would marry the ugly bride? But Thomas Morrison had, or at least he'd said he would. They'd met at a church social, where he'd been new in town, working for the railroad. He'd been polite to her, even kind. When he'd started calling on her, Eleanor had hardly dared to believe it. He brought her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings, talking about his plans for the future, a future that somehow included her. "Your face doesn't matter to me," he'd said one night, taking her hand. "It's your heart I'm marrying." She'd been young enough, foolish enough, to believe him. The night before the wedding, there'd been a party at the saloon. Thomas had drunk too much whiskey, and someone, she never learned who, had bet him $5 he wouldn't go through with it. They'd brought a lantern close to her face while she served punch at the church hall, made him really look at what he was binding himself to. Eleanor had seen the moment his resolve crumbled, watched the color drain from his face as he truly saw her scar in the harsh light. But she'd still put on the dress the next morning, still walked to the church, still stood at the altar waiting, and waiting, and waiting. Reverend Cooper had finally taken pity on her, leading her to the back room while the crowd dispersed in whispers and poorly concealed laughter. She'd walked home in her wedding dress, the train dragging in the dust, while children sang behind her, "Ugly bride, ugly bride." Even the groom couldn't stand to look at the ugly bride. Thomas had taken the morning stage to California. The last anyone heard, he was working in the goldfields, probably telling stories about the monster he'd almost married. Eleanor punched the bread dough with more force than necessary, trying to drive out the memories, but they clung like cobwebs, sticky and persistent. She'd burned the wedding dress that night, watching the silk curl and blacken in the flames, but she couldn't burn away the name they'd given her, couldn't erase the humiliation that had become her identity. A knock at the door made her jump. No one came here, ever. She wiped her floury hands on her apron, approaching the door warily. Through the small window, she could see a familiar, broad-shouldered figure, the mountain man from town, Caleb McAllister. She'd learned his name was, though she couldn't imagine why he was here. She opened the door a crack. "Mr. McAllister." "Morning. Miss Hartley, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I noticed your fence is down along the north side. Thought you might need help fixing it before your chickens decide to explore the countryside." Eleanor peered past him and saw that, indeed, a section of fence had collapsed, probably in last night's wind. She'd been meaning to fix it, but hadn't managed alone. That's kind of you, but I couldn't pay you. Didn't ask for pay, just being neighborly." Neighborly. When had anyone ever been neighborly to the ugly bride? "I have tools in the shed," she said finally, opening the door wider. They worked in companionable silence, Caleb doing the heavy lifting while Eleanor held posts steady and handed him nails. He was efficient and skilled, wasting no motion. Within an hour, The fence stood straight and strong again. "Can I offer you some water? Coffee?" Eleanor asked as they put away the tools. "Coffee would be welcome." She led him to the small kitchen, acutely aware of how shabby everything must seem to him. But Caleb settled into a chair as if he belonged there, accepting the steaming mug with a nod of thanks. "You've done well with this place," he said, looking around. "It's not easy, farming alone out here. My father taught me, before he died." "How long have you been on your own?" 5 years. She kept her scarred side turned away, a habit so ingrained she barely noticed anymore. "That's a long time. Most women would have sold and moved back east." Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "Where would I go? Who would want—" She stopped herself. Who would want what? His gray eyes were steady on hers. "Nothing. More coffee?" He held out his mug. "You were going to say who would want you because of your face." Eleanor's hand trembled as she poured. No one spoke of it so directly. "You don't have to turn away," he said quietly. "I've already seen you. All of you. Then you know why I stay here. I know why you think you have to stay here. Not the same thing." She set down the coffee pot harder than necessary. "What do you want? Mr. McAllister? Why are you really here?" "Maybe I just wanted to fix a fence and drink coffee with a neighbor." "I'm not your neighbor. You live on Thunder Mountain. That's 20 miles from here." A slight smile creased his weathered face. "In this country, that makes us practically family." Despite herself, Eleanor felt her lips twitch toward a smile. It had been so long since anyone had just talked to her, treated her like a person instead of a curiosity or a curse. "They say Thunder Mountain is haunted," she said, sitting across from him. "They say a lot of things. Most of them aren't true." His eyes found hers again. "They say you're cursed, that the devil marked you, that you bring bad luck to anyone who comes near you." Eleanor's chin lifted. Maybe they're right. No. The word was firm. Certain. "I've seen evil. Miss Hartley. Real evil. It doesn't leave marks on the outside. It hides behind smiling faces and sweet words. What you have is just a scar. What they have." He gestured toward town. "That's the real ugliness." She stared at him, this strange man who'd appeared in her life like a character from one of her books. "You don't know me. You don't know what it's like. I know you come to town when you have to, face their cruelty with dignity. I know you keep this place running alone when most would have given up. I know you're stronger than any of them realize." "Stop." The word came out harsh. "Just stop. I don't need pity." "Good, because I'm not offering any." He finished his coffee and stood. "Thanks for the coffee, Miss Hartley. I'll be heading back now." She followed him to the door, confused and oddly disappointed. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned back. "I come to town every few weeks for supplies. Might be I could bring you things, save you some trips, if you'd like." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. "Why would you do that?" "Because everyone needs a friend. Miss Hartley. Even mountain men, even ugly brides." He said the cruel nickname gently, robbing it of its power. "Think about it." He touched his hat and strode away, leaving Eleanor standing in the doorway, watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Her heart was racing, and she didn't understand why. No one had ever offered friendship before. She didn't know what to do with it. This unexpected kindness from a stranger. Inside, his empty coffee mug sat on the table, proof that the morning hadn't been a dream. Eleanor picked it up, holding it in her hands, feeling the lingering warmth. For the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to be alone forever. Thunder Mountain rose from the earth like a giant's fist, its peaks shrouded in clouds even on clear days. Ancient pines clung to its slopes, their roots digging deep into rocky soil. While eagles nested in the highest crags, it was a place of profound solitude, where the wind sang hymns older than human memory and the snow never fully melted from the northern faces. Caleb McAllister's cabin sat in a sheltered valley halfway up the mountain, built from logs he'd cut and hauled himself. It wasn't large, one room with a sleeping loft, but it was solid, made to withstand the brutal winters when snow could pile up past the windows and the temperature dropped so low that spit would freeze before it hit the ground. He stood on the small porch, watching the sun paint the peaks in shades of rose and gold. Below, the Clearwater River wound through the canyon like a silver snake, its voice a constant murmur that had become the soundtrack to his days. This morning, however, his thoughts weren't on the familiar landscape. He kept seeing Eleanor Hartley's eyes, not the scar that everyone else fixated on, but those deep brown eyes that held such a mixture of strength and sorrow. Eyes that had seen too much cruelty, expected too little kindness. A wolf's howl echoed across the valley, answered by another from a distant ridge. Caleb knew that particular call, the alpha female of the Clearwater pack, announcing the morning hunt. He'd watched them often enough, admiring their fierce loyalty to each other, the way they moved as one body with many parts. Wolves understood something humans often forgot, that survival meant protecting your own, not casting them out for being different. He went inside to prepare for the day's work. His rifle needed cleaning, and he had pelts to prepare for trading. The beaver were plentiful this year in the high country streams, and their fur would bring good money. But first, breakfast, bacon, biscuits, and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. As he ate, his gaze fell on the book stacked on a rough shelf. Shakespeare, Thoreau, a worn Bible that had been his mother's. Most people assumed mountain men were illiterate brutes, but Caleb had been educated back east before the war changed everything, before he'd learned that civilization was just a pretty word for organized cruelty. The war, even now, 15 years later, the memories could ambush him. Not the battles. Those had been honest in their violence. It was what came after that had driven him to these mountains. The things men did when they thought God wasn't watching, when they had power over those weaker than themselves. He pushed the thoughts away and gathered his gear. The trap line wouldn't check itself, and he wanted to scout the eastern ridge for sign of the elk herd. But first, he had another task. From a wooden box, he pulled out a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a book he'd ordered from Denver months ago, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. He'd remembered seeing books in Eleanor's cabin, had noticed how carefully she'd mended the bindings. A woman who treasured books in this rough country was rare indeed. The ride down to her place took 2 hours, following game trails and his own knowledge of the mountain's secrets. He could have made it faster on the main road, but Caleb preferred the hidden ways. Too many years of staying invisible had made it second nature. He found her in the garden, fighting a losing battle with the weeds that seemed to grow overnight in the sandy soil. She wore a faded blue dress and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. When she heard his horse, she straightened, one hand going to the small of her back. "Mr. McAllister." Her voice held surprise, but not, he noted with satisfaction, fear. "Miss Hartley, brought you something from town." He dismounted and pulled out the package, along with a small sack. "Coffee and sugar, too. Figured you might be running low." She approached slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I can't keep accepting gifts from you." "It's not a gift. It's—" He searched for the right word. "It's what neighbors do." That almost smile flickered across her face again. 20 miles. Remember? I've got a good horse." She took the package, unwrapping it carefully. When she saw the book, her breath caught. Oh, Mr. McAllister, this is—" "Caleb," he interrupted. "If we're going to be neighbors, might as well use first names." "Caleb," she said it softly, like she was testing the sound. This must have cost a fortune to order. "I've got more pelts than I know what to do with. Might as well trade them for something worthwhile." She clutched the book to her chest, and for a moment, her whole face transformed. The scar was still there, of course, but joy lit her from within, making her almost luminous. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was. Would you like some lunch?" she asked. I've got stew on the stove. They ate at her small table, the book prominently displayed between them like a centerpiece. Eleanor asked about life on the mountain, and Caleb found himself telling her things he'd never shared with anyone, about the wolf pack, the hidden waterfall that stayed liquid even in winter, the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion come spring. "It sounds beautiful," she said wistfully. "It is. Dangerous, too. Last winter I got caught in a whiteout, had to dig a snow cave and wait it out for 2 days. Lived on melted snow and the jerky in my pack." "Weren't you frightened?" He considered this. "No. The mountain's honest. It'll kill you if you're careless. But it doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. It's people who frighten me." "People lie, even to themselves." Eleanor's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup. "Thomas used to lie, to me, to himself. He'd say beautiful things, make promises." Her voice dropped. I wanted so badly to believe them. "This Thomas, he was the one who left me at the altar." "Yes." She raised her chin, meeting his eyes directly. The whole town was there. They'd been taking bets on whether he'd go through with it. "Mrs. Patterson won $20. Caleb's hands tightened on his cup. "He was a fool. No, he was just weak, and I was a fool for thinking anyone could see past this." She gestured to her face. "I see past it." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor's eyes widened, and color crept into her cheeks. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know enough." She stood abruptly, busying herself with clearing the dishes. "You should go. People will talk if they see your horse here too long." "Let them talk." Easy for you to say. "You don't have to live with their judgment." "Don't I?" He rose, moving to stand near her at the wash basin. "You think you're the only one who's been marked by life. Everyone has scars. Eleanor, some just show more than others." She turned to face him, really looking at him for perhaps the first time. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar that nicked his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair was starting to silver at the temples. But more than that, she saw the shadows in his storm-gray eyes, the weight of untold stories. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. "War. And what came after?" He stepped back, creating distance. "I should go, but I'll be back, if you'll have me." "Why?" The question seemed pulled from her against her will. "Why do you keep coming here?" Caleb paused at the door, considering his answer. "Because when I see you, I don't see what they call you. I don't see the ugly bride." He turned to face her fully. "I see a woman who tends her garden and feeds her chickens and reads books by lamplight. I see someone who faces cruelty with dignity and finds beauty in hard places. I see strength that puts most men to shame." Eleanor's hand went to her throat. "Caleb, think about something for me." He continued. "If that scar was gone tomorrow, would you really be any different? Would your heart change, your mind, your spirit? Or would you still be Eleanor Hartley, who survived what would break most people?" He left her standing there, staring after him with tears streaming down her face. As he rode away, he could feel her watching from the window, and he wondered if she understood yet what he was trying to tell her. The sun was setting by the time he reached his cabin, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The wolves were singing again, their voices rising and falling in ancient harmonies. Caleb unsaddled his horse and stood listening, thinking about loneliness and connection, about scars both visible and hidden. He'd come to these mountains to escape the world of men, to find peace in solitude. But sometimes he was learning. What you ran from had a way of circling back. Sometimes the very thing you thought you didn't need turned out to be exactly what you'd been missing. In her cabin 20 miles away, Eleanor Hartley sat reading by lamplight, the new book open on her lap. But her mind kept drifting to storm-gray eyes and a voice that spoke her name without flinching. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think the word, friend. It was a dangerous word, full of possibility and the potential for pain. But as night settled over the valley and the coyotes began their evening chorus, Eleanor whispered it aloud to the empty room, tasting hope on her tongue like honey from a half-remembered dream. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm as natural as the changing seasons. Every few days, Caleb would appear at Eleanor's gate, sometimes with supplies from town, sometimes with fresh game, always with that quiet presence that had become as comforting as morning coffee. He'd fix whatever needed fixing: a loose board on the chicken coop, a stubborn pump handle, a door that wouldn't close properly, and she'd feed him, their conversations growing longer and deeper with each visit. Eleanor found herself looking forward to the sound of his horse on the trail, catching herself glancing toward the ridge throughout the day. It was dangerous. This anticipation, this warmth that spread through her chest when she saw his tall figure approaching. She'd learned long ago that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet here it was, sprouting like wildflowers after rain. On this particular morning, she was hanging laundry when she heard unfamiliar voices. Not Caleb's deep rumble, but the harsh laughter of multiple men. Her stomach clenched as she recognized Jake Sullivan's whiskey-rough voice. Well, if it ain't the ugly bride herself." 3 men stood at her gate: Sullivan, Pete Morrison, Thomas's cousin, she noted with a sick feeling, and a younger man she didn't recognize. All 3 had the glazed look of men who'd started drinking early. "Gentlemen," she said carefully, not moving from behind the laundry line, "can I help you?" "Heard you've been entertaining," Sullivan said, pushing open the gate without invitation. "That mountain man's been spending a lot of time here. Mr. McAllister has been kind enough to help with repairs." Eleanor kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "That what they're calling it now?" Pete laughed, an ugly sound. "My cousin couldn't stomach looking at you, but seems like that wild man ain't so particular." The younger man giggled. "Maybe he's blind. Or maybe ugliness don't matter to savages." Eleanor's hands tightened on the wet sheet she was holding. "I'll ask you to leave my property." "Your property?" Sullivan moved closer, and she could smell the liquor on him. "Little woman like you, all alone out here, ain't safe. All sorts of things could happen." "Especially," Pete added, circling around the other side, "to someone who's already cursed. Bad luck has a way of finding people like you." Eleanor backed away, but they matched her movement. The house was too far, and even if she reached it, the door didn't lock properly, something she'd meant to ask Caleb to fix. "Please," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "Just go." Sullivan reached out, his dirty fingers catching her sleeve. "Maybe we should get a closer look at that face. See what exactly that mountain man finds so interesting." She jerked away, but Pete grabbed her other arm. The younger man laughed again, high and nervous. Eleanor's bonnet fell back as she struggled, exposing her scar to the harsh morning light. "God almighty," Pete whistled. "It's even worse up close. How does he stand?" The sentence ended in a wet crunch as a fist connected with his nose. Pete dropped like a stone, blood streaming through his fingers. Sullivan spun around to find Caleb standing there, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. "Let her go." His voice was quiet, controlled, but something in it made Sullivan immediately release Eleanor's arm. "Now, hold on," Sullivan started. "We were just—" Caleb's fist caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. The younger man tried to run, but Caleb grabbed him by the collar, lifting him almost off his feet. "You come near her again," Caleb said, still in that terrifyingly calm voice, "and I'll kill you. That's not a threat. It's a promise." He released the boy, who scrambled away like a spooked rabbit. Pete was trying to crawl toward the gate, leaving a trail of blood from his broken nose. Sullivan wheezed, attempting to straighten up. "You'll pay for this," he gasped. "The whole town will hear about this. You assaulted us. I defended a woman from 3 drunken fools who forced their way onto her property." Caleb stepped closer, and Sullivan flinched. "But you're right about one thing. The whole town will hear about this. They'll hear how 3 grown men came here to terrorize a woman living alone, how you put your filthy hands on her, how you threatened her." Eleanor watched from the porch steps where she'd retreated, her whole body trembling. Not from fear now, but from something else entirely. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever thought she was worth defending. Sullivan helped Pete to his feet, and they stumbled toward the gate. At the edge of her property, Sullivan turned back, his face twisted with hate. "This ain't over." "You can't protect her all the time. Mountain man. And when you're gone," he spat in the dirt. "Well, cursed people have a way of meeting bad ends." After they'd gone, Caleb turned to Eleanor. The ice in his eyes thawed immediately, replaced by concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He climbed the porch steps slowly, as if approaching a spooked animal. "Eleanor, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Not pity, not disgust, but a protective fury that took her breath away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You shouldn't have. Now they'll cause trouble for you too. Let them try." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her arm where Sullivan had grabbed her. "Did they hurt you?" "No. You came in time." A sob caught in her throat. "Why were you here? It's not your usual day." Had a feeling. His thumb rubbed gently over the red marks on her arm. "Sometimes the mountain tells me things. This morning it said to ride down here." Eleanor laughed, a shaky sound. "The mountain talks to you?" "Everything talks if you know how to listen." His hand moved to cup her face, his palm warm against her cheek. "Eleanor, what they said?" "It's nothing I haven't heard before. That doesn't make it right." His thumb traced the edge of her scar with infinite gentleness. "When I look at you, you know what I see?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I see courage, beauty, strength that humble men like me can only admire from afar." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "I see a woman worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth loving." The last word hung between them like a prayer. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You can't mean that," she whispered. "Look at me. Really look at me." "I am looking." His other hand came up to frame her face. "I've been looking since the day I first saw you in town, and every time I look, you become more beautiful to me." "Caleb." "The city feared the ugly bride," he said softly. "But only I see beyond the monster they created. I see you. Eleanor. Just you." Time seemed to stop. The world narrowed to just the two of them on that weathered porch. To his hands gentle on her face, and his eyes seeing straight through to her soul. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head. The kiss was soft, barely a brush of lips, but it shattered something inside Eleanor. All the walls she'd built, all the armor she'd worn against the world's cruelty, crumbled like sand. She made a sound, half sob, half sigh, and he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. When they finally parted, Eleanor was crying openly, years of pain and loneliness pouring out in a flood. Caleb held her through it, his large hands gentle as they stroked her hair, his voice murmuring words of comfort. "They'll make your life miserable now," she said when she could speak again. "The whole town will turn against you. Let them. I've faced worse than small-minded fools." He tilted her chin up. "But I won't let them hurt you again. I swear it. You can't be here all the time." "Then come with me." The word surprised them both. Eleanor pulled back, staring at him. "What?" "Come to the mountain. Stay with me." His voice grew urgent. "I've got room. You could bring your chickens, your books. We could build a proper coop, expand the garden. You'd be safe there." "Caleb, we can't just. People don't just." "Why not? Because they say so? Because their rules matter more than your safety?" He stood, pacing the porch with restless energy. "I've spent 10 years alone on that mountain. Eleanor, 10 years of silence and solitude. And I told myself it was what I wanted. But then I met you, and I realized I wasn't living. I was just hiding." Eleanor rose on shaky legs. "And what am I doing if I run to your mountain? Isn't that hiding too?" "No." He turned to face her. "It's choosing to live somewhere you're valued, somewhere you're safe, somewhere you're loved." There was that word again. Love. Such a small word to carry such enormous weight. "I need time to think," she said softly. "Of course." He moved toward the steps, then paused. "But Eleanor, don't take too long. Men like Sullivan don't forget, and they don't forgive." After he'd gone, Eleanor stood on her porch for a long time, her fingers touching her lips where the memory of his kiss still lingered. The sun climbed higher, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the town church bells ringing the hour. Change was coming. She could feel it in the air like the approach of a storm. The only question was whether she'd have the courage to meet it head on, or whether she'd let fear keep her trapped in this half-life forever. In the kitchen, Jane Eyre lay open on the table, its pages fluttering in the breeze from the open window. Eleanor picked it up, running her fingers over the words she'd read so many times before. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will." Perhaps, she thought, it was time to prove it. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire in August grass. By sunset, everyone knew that the mountain man had attacked 3 upstanding citizens who were simply checking on poor Eleanor Hartley's welfare. The story grew with each telling. Broken bones became near-death beatings. Concerned neighbors became good Samaritans. And Caleb McAllister transformed from a reclusive mountain dweller into a dangerous savage. In the Brass Eagle Saloon, Jake Sullivan held court, his shirt still bloody for effect. "The man's gone wild," he declared to his rapt audience. "Living up there with the beasts. He's become one himself. And now he's got his claws into that cursed woman. Always knew there was something off about him." Samuel Hayes chimed in, though he'd never exchanged more than 5 words with Caleb. "No decent man lives alone like that. What I want to know," Mrs. Patterson said from where the respectable women gathered near the door, "is what exactly he's doing out at her place. No God-fearing man visits an unmarried woman that often without sinful purposes." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The combination of fear, jealousy, and self-righteousness was potent as moonshine. "Something ought to be done," Pete Morrison said. His nose splinted and both eyes blackened. "We can't have violent men threatening peaceful folk. And we can't have that cursed woman bringing more evil to our town," added Reverend Cooper's wife. "First, she drives away a good man with her ugliness. Now she's consorting with heathens. What's next?" Sheriff Williams, a tired man who preferred his peace and quiet, raised a hand. "Now hold on. Far as I can tell, McAllister was defending Miss Hartley's property from trespassers. That ain't illegal." "Whose side are you on, Sheriff?" Sullivan demanded. "The side of decent folk, or the side of monsters and madmen?" The crowd's energy shifted, growing darker. Williams recognized the mood. He'd seen it before, when fear and hatred mixed into something explosive. "I'm on the side of the law," he said firmly. "And the law says a man can defend his property and his friends." "Friends," someone scoffed. "Is that what they're calling it?" Outside town, Eleanor stood at her window, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. She'd seen the dust clouds of riders heading to town, knew the story would be spreading. By now, Caleb's act of protection would have been twisted into something ugly. A soft knock made her jump. She grabbed her father's old shotgun before approaching the door. "It's Mary Chen," a voice called softly. Eleanor opened the door to find the grocer's daughter, a basket in her hands and worry in her eyes. "Miss Eleanor," Mary said quickly. "Papa sent me. He says you should know. There's bad talk in town, real bad, about you and Mr. McAllister." "Come in," Eleanor said, ushering the girl inside. Mary was one of the few who'd ever shown her kindness, perhaps because the Chen family knew what it was like to be outsiders. "They're saying terrible things," Mary continued, setting down her basket. "That you've bewitched him, that you're both dangerous, Mr. Sullivan's got folks worked up something fierce." Eleanor's hands trembled as she poured tea. "And your father?" "Papa says Mr. McAllister is a good man who pays fair and treats us decent. But well, you know, our word doesn't carry much weight." Mary's face was apologetic. Papa also sent these supplies. He says maybe you shouldn't come to town for a while." After Mary left, Eleanor sat in the growing darkness, her thoughts churning. Caleb had been right. Sullivan wouldn't forget or forgive, and now the whole town was turning against them both. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, trying to be quiet. Her mouth went dry as she remembered Sullivan's parting threat. She grabbed the shotgun and crept to the window. In the moonlight, she could see shapes moving toward her house. 5, maybe 6 men, carrying torches and what looked like rope. Terror crystallized into clarity. She had to run. Now! Eleanor threw essentials into a satchel, clothes, her mother's jewelry, the book Caleb had given her. She scattered feed for the chickens, hoping someone would care for them, then slipped out the back door. The men were at the front, arguing in harsh whispers about who would go in first. Eleanor used their distraction to creep toward the small barn where her father's old mare dozed. The horse was past her prime, but still sturdy. She'd just gotten the saddle on when she heard breaking glass. They were inside. "Where is she?" someone shouted. "Find her." Eleanor led the mare out quietly, her heart hammering. But as she tried to mount, a figure stepped from behind the barn. "Going somewhere? Ugly bride?" Pete Morrison's grin was visible even in the darkness. Eleanor raised the shotgun, but her hands shook so badly she could barely aim. Now, Pete said, moving closer. "We just want to talk. About you and that mountain man. About the evil you're spreading." "Stay back," Eleanor warned, but her voice cracked. "Or what? You'll shoot me?" He laughed. "You ain't got the courage. Ugly and cowardly. No wonder Thomas ran." The cruel words hit their mark, but they also ignited something in Eleanor. All the years of abuse, all the pain and humiliation, crystallized into a single moment of fury. "Get out of my way," she said, and this time her voice was steel. Pete's eyes widened at her tone, but before he could respond, a shot rang out. Not from Eleanor's gun, but from somewhere in the darkness. Pete yelped and dove for cover as the bullet kicked up dirt at his feet. "The next one won't miss," Caleb's voice called out. He emerged from the shadows, rifle steady, his gray eyes glinting like a wolf's. "Everyone out of the house, now!" The men poured out, some looking sheepish, others defiant. Sullivan was among them, a torch still in his hand. "This is town business, McAllister," Sullivan said. "No concern of yours. Everything about Miss Hartley concerns me." Caleb's rifle never wavered. "You're trespassing, you're threatening, and you're leaving. Now." "There's 6 of us and 1 of you," Pete said, trying to sound brave from his position behind a water trough. "1 of me is plenty." Caleb's smile was cold. "I spent 3 years killing Confederates. Got real good at it. You want to test me?" The silence stretched taut. Then Sheriff Williams appeared, breathing hard from the ride. "That's enough," the sheriff said. "Everyone stand down." "Sheriff," Sullivan started, "this woman is on her own property, which you men invaded." Williams looked tired but determined. "Go home, all of you, now." Grumbling, threatening, but ultimately cowed by the combination of Caleb's rifle and the sheriff's authority. The men dispersed. Sullivan was the last to go, his face twisted with rage. "This ain't over," he spat. "The whole town knows what you are now. Both of you. Monsters don't get to live among decent folk." After they'd gone, Williams turned to Eleanor and Caleb. "They'll be back. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll be back, and next time I might not get here in time." Eleanor felt the last of her strength leave her. She sagged against the mare, the shotgun slipping from numb fingers. Caleb was there instantly, his arms around her. "It's all right. You're safe." "No?" she whispered. "I'll never be safe here. Never." Williams cleared his throat. "Miss Hartley, Mr. McAllister, I'm going to offer some advice. Take it or leave it. But if it were me, I'd be gone by morning. Head somewhere else. Start fresh." "She doesn't have to leave," Caleb said fiercely. "This is her home." "Was," Eleanor corrected softly. She pulled back to look at both men. "But it's not anymore. Maybe it never really was." She turned to Caleb. seeing in his eyes the same pain she felt. "You asked me to come with you, to the mountain. Does that offer still stand?" "Always," he said without hesitation. Williams nodded slowly. "For what it's worth." "I think that's wise." "I'll try to keep things calm here, but fear and hatred—" He shook his head. "They're like poison. They spread." As the sheriff rode away, Eleanor looked at her house, her father's house, one last time. The broken window stared back like an accusing eye. Inside, she knew. They'd torn apart her few possessions, searching for evidence of witchcraft or worse. "We'll get your things," Caleb said gently. "Pack what matters." "What matters is standing right here," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. He kissed her then, there in the yard where violence had threatened moments before. It was a promise, a claim, a declaration that no amount of hatred could diminish. When morning came, they were gone. Eleanor rode behind Caleb on his sturdy mountain horse, her arms around his waist, her father's mare tied behind with saddlebags full of books, her mother's china, and a few precious memories. As they climbed toward Thunder Mountain, Eleanor looked back once at the town spread below, already stirring with morning activity. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could imagine the gossip spreading with the new day. The ugly bride had run off with the wild man. Good riddance. The curse was lifted. Let them talk, she thought, turning her face toward the mountains and the man who'd seen her truly. She was done being their monster, their cautionary tale, their ugly bride. She was just Eleanor now, riding toward a new life with a man who kissed her scars and called her beautiful. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe it might be true. The first snow came early that year, dusting Thunder Mountain's peaks while the valley below still clung to autumn's gold. Eleanor stood at the window of Caleb's cabin, their cabin now, watching fat flakes drift down like feathers from some celestial bird. 6 weeks had passed since she'd fled her old life, and each day had been a revelation. "Coffee's ready," Caleb called from the hearth, where he'd added another log to the fire. She turned from the window, still marveling at how natural this felt. The cabin had been transformed by her presence. Curtains at the windows, her mother's china displayed on new shelves Caleb had built, books arranged alongside his own, wild flowers in a mason jar on the table. But more than the physical changes, there was a warmth here now that had nothing to do with the fire. "The Clearwater pack was hunting near the ridge this morning," Caleb said, handing her a steaming mug. "Brought down an elk. The alpha female has a new litter. I counted 4 pups playing near the den." Eleanor smiled. She'd been frightened of the wolves at first, but Caleb had taught her to read their behavior, to understand their language of howls and body posture. Now she looked forward to their evening songs. "Will they have enough food for winter?" she asked, settling into the chair he'd carved for her from pine. "The pack's strong. They'll survive." He sat across from her, his own coffee cradled in his large hands. "The question is whether we have enough supplies. That snowfall means the pass might close early." They'd made 2 trips to the nearest trading post, not Willow Creek, but a smaller settlement 30 miles north where no one knew their names or their story. Eleanor had worn her bonnet pulled low, but the trader's wife had been kind, commenting only on the quality of Eleanor's mending when she'd offered to take in work. "I can make what we have stretch," Eleanor said. "I've been preserving the berries we gathered, and the root cellar is full." Caleb's expression grew serious. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something." Her stomach tightened. She'd been happy here, happier than she'd ever imagined possible, but part of her had been waiting for this contentment to shatter. "I've been thinking about what Sheriff Williams said, about starting fresh somewhere else." He set down his coffee, leaning forward. "We could go to California, Oregon Territory, somewhere nobody knows either of us." "You want to leave the mountain?" "I want you to be safe, happy, free to walk into a store without hiding your face." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper around the eaves. Then she rose and went to him, settling onto his lap in a way that still felt daringly intimate. "Caleb McAllister," she said, framing his face with her hands. "I have never been happier than I am right here. This mountain, this cabin, this is my freedom." "But," she silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her certainty into the gesture. When they parted, she kept her forehead pressed against his. "In town, I was the ugly bride, a monster, a curse, a thing to be mocked and feared. Here, I'm just Eleanor, your Eleanor." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "Why would I want to leave the only place I've ever felt beautiful?" His arms tightened around her. "You are beautiful. Here, there, anywhere." "I'm starting to believe that," she admitted. "When you look at me, I almost forget about the scar." "What scar?" he asked, and the genuine confusion in his voice made her laugh. They spent the morning in comfortable domesticity, Caleb checking his trap lines while Eleanor baked bread and mended his shirts. It was a life she'd never dared imagine for herself, this simple partnership of shared work and quiet contentment. But peace in the wilderness was always temporary. The wolves alerted them first, their howls taking on an urgent quality that made Caleb reach for his rifle. Eleanor looked up from her sewing, ice forming in her veins at his expression. "What is it?" "Riders, coming up the mountain." He moved to the window, scanning the trail below. 6, maybe 7. Eleanor's hands began to shake. "They found us. Get the ammunition. Load the spare rifles." His voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "And Eleanor, whatever happens, you stay inside." She wanted to argue, but the look he gave her brooked no disagreement. As she gathered the weapons, her mind raced. They'd been so careful, so sure they'd covered their tracks. The riders came into view, dark shapes against the snow. Eleanor recognized Jake Sullivan's hulking form, Pete Morrison's nervous energy. They'd brought friends, hard men with harder faces, the kind who did dirty work for whoever paid best. "McAllister," Sullivan's voice carried clearly in the thin mountain air. "We know you're in there. You and that devil woman both." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. "You're a long way from home." "Sullivan. Had to be. You stole something from our town." Sullivan dismounted, keeping his hands visible but ready. "That woman brings curses wherever she goes. We aim to end it." "The only curse here is your ignorance." Caleb replied, "Turn around. Leave. Don't come back." Pete laughed, high and ugly. 7 of us, mountain man, 1 of you, and this time, no sheriff to interfere." "This time," Caleb said quietly, "you're on my mountain." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Eleanor watched through a crack in the shutters, her father's shotgun heavy in her hands. She'd promised to stay inside, but if they rushed Caleb, it was Sullivan who moved first, going for his gun. Caleb's rifle spoke, and Sullivan spun away, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered for cover, firing wildly. The battle was fierce but brief. Caleb moved like the wolves he'd studied, using the terrain and his knowledge of every rock and tree. Eleanor watched him disappear and reappear, each shot carefully placed to wound, not kill. Even now, even defending their home, he showed mercy, but mercy had its price. A lucky shot from Pete caught Caleb in the side, sending him stumbling. Eleanor saw red bloom across his shirt, and something primitive took over. She burst through the door, shotgun raised. "No!" she screamed, firing into the air. "Enough!" The shooting stopped. Everyone turned to stare at the woman they'd come to destroy. Eleanor stood on the porch like an avenging angel, her scar livid against her pale face, her eyes blazing with fury. "You want me?" she shouted. "Here I am, the ugly bride, the monster, the curse. Look at me!" She pulled off her bonnet, letting her hair stream free, fully exposing the scar that had defined her life. "Is this what you came for? To kill a woman because her face offends you?" One of the hired men lowered his gun, looking uncertain. "Nobody said nothing about killing a woman." "What did you think would happen?" Eleanor demanded. "You came here with guns. threatening us. What did Sullivan promise you?" The men exchanged glances. In the harsh light of Eleanor's courage, their mission suddenly seemed less righteous. "She's bewitched you all!" Pete shrieked, but his voice cracked with desperation. "Can't you see? She's—" His words cut off as Caleb, bleeding but steady, pressed his rifle barrel against Pete's temple. "She's the woman I love," he said simply, "and you're done terrorizing her." Sullivan, still clutching his wounded shoulder, struggled to his feet. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is." A new voice entered the scene. Sheriff Williams emerged from the tree line, accompanied by several deputies. "Jake Sullivan, Pete Morrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder." "Sheriff?" Sullivan gaped. "How?" "Mary Chen overheard you planning this at the saloon. Her father rode all night to fetch me." Williams looked tired but satisfied. "Turns out attacking innocent people is still illegal, even if you don't like how they look." As the deputies rounded up the attackers, Williams approached Eleanor and Caleb. "You folks all right?" "We will be," Eleanor said, pressing a cloth to Caleb's wound. "Sheriff, I don't understand. Why would you ride all this way?" Williams smiled sadly. "Because I've been sheriff in Willow Creek for 15 years, and I've watched fear and hatred poison that town bit by bit. Maybe I can't change everyone's hearts, but I can still enforce the law." After the lawmen left with their prisoners, Eleanor tended Caleb's wound. It was painful, but not deep, the bullet having grazed his ribs. As she worked, tears streamed down her face. "Hey," he said softly, catching her hands. "I'm all right. You could have been killed because of me." "No, because of them." He pulled her close despite his injury. "Eleanor, you were magnificent. The way you stood up to them, I was terrified." She admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." He kissed her forehead. "My brave, beautiful Eleanor." As night fell, they sat together by the fire, the violence of the day already feeling distant. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the blood and tracks, making the world clean and new again. "They might come back," Eleanor said quietly. "Others like them. Maybe, but I don't think so. Williams will spread the word about what happened here. And sometimes, when bullies get stood up to, they lose their power." Eleanor gazed into the flames, thinking about the man who'd called her bewitching, who'd lowered his gun when faced with her humanity. Maybe Caleb was right. Maybe courage could be contagious. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. Caleb's eyes softened. "And I love you, scars and all. Because of them," she corrected, touching her face. "They led me to you." Outside, the wolves began their evening song, wild and free and beautiful. Eleanor listened, feeling their music resonate in her bones. She was one of them now, a creature of the mountain, fierce and proud and no longer afraid. The ugly bride was gone, that frightened woman who'd hidden behind bonnets and bowed heads. In her place sat Eleanor McAllister, for that's how she thought of herself now, though no ceremony had made it official. A woman who'd faced down armed men and chosen love over fear. And as the fire crackled and Caleb's arms held her close, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Winter had locked Thunder Mountain in its icy grip, but inside the cabin, warmth prevailed. 3 months had passed since the attack, and Caleb's wound had healed to a pink scar that Eleanor sometimes traced with gentle fingers. They'd settled into the rhythm of winter life, long evenings by the fire, mornings breaking ice on the water barrel, afternoons spent reading aloud while snow piled against the windows. But tonight was different. Eleanor could feel it in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with the blizzard howling outside. Caleb had been quiet all day, his gray eyes following her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Something's coming," he said suddenly, setting aside the knife he'd been sharpening. Eleanor looked up from her mending. "The storm's already here." "Not the storm. Something else." He moved to the window, peering out into the swirling white. "The wolves were acting strange today. keeping close to the den, posting sentries. As if summoned by his words, a howl rose above the wind. Not the usual evening song, but sharp, warning. Caleb reached for his rifle. "Stay here," he said. But Eleanor was already reaching for the shotgun. "We've had this discussion," she said firmly. "Where you go, I go." He started to argue, then stopped, recognizing the steel in her voice. She wasn't the frightened woman who'd hidden behind locked doors anymore. They waited, tense and ready, as the howls multiplied. Then, through the storm's fury, came another sound. Horses screaming, men shouting, the crack of timber giving way. The bridge. Caleb breathed. Someone tried to cross in this storm. Without hesitation, they bundled into their heavy coats and ventured into the blizzard. The wind hit like a physical force, driving snow into their faces, but Caleb knew every inch of his mountain. Eleanor stayed close, her hand gripping his coat as they fought their way toward the ravine. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The small bridge over Clearwater Creek had partially collapsed. Whether from the storm or sabotage, they couldn't tell. Men and horses struggled in the icy water below, their cries barely audible over the wind. "There!" Eleanor pointed to a figure clinging to a broken beam. Even in the darkness, she recognized him. "It's Pete Morrison." Caleb was already moving, pulling rope from his pack. "Hold this," he told Eleanor, securing one end around a sturdy pine. Without hesitation, he lowered himself toward the water. Eleanor watched, her heart in her throat. As Caleb reached Pete, the younger man was barely conscious, his lips blue with cold. Other figures struggled nearby. She counted at least 4 more men in the water. "Pull!" Caleb shouted, and Eleanor hauled on the rope with all her strength. Inch by painful inch, they dragged Pete to safety. "There are others," Eleanor said, already resetting the rope. They worked through the night, a desperate battle against cold and current. Caleb went down again and again, pulling men from the icy water while Eleanor anchored the rope and revived the rescued with blankets from their packs. The wolves watched from the ridge above, their eyes glowing in the darkness, standing witness to this strange reversal, prey saving predators. By dawn, they'd pulled 5 men from the creek. 2 hadn't survived the cold, but 3 lived, including Pete Morrison and a man Eleanor didn't recognize. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving the world buried in pristine white. "We need to get them to the cabin," Caleb said, exhaustion clear in his voice. His clothes were frozen stiff, ice crystallizing in his beard. They improvised a travois from branches and blankets, dragging the survivors back to warmth. Eleanor worked with grim efficiency, stripping wet clothes, wrapping the men in every blanket they owned, forcing hot broth between blue lips. Pete was the first to regain full consciousness. He stared at Eleanor with confusion that deepened to shame as memory returned. "You saved me," he whispered. "Both of you. After everything His voice broke. "Drink this," Eleanor said quietly, offering more broth. "Save your strength." The other survivor, a hired gun named Frank Towers, was more vocal in his disbelief. "Why?" he kept asking. "We came to kill you." Caleb, changed into dry clothes but still shivering, fixed the man with steady eyes. "Because that's what separates us from animals. Choice. You chose hatred. We choose mercy." As the day wore on, the full story emerged. After Sullivan's arrest, a group of die-hard sympathizers had pooled money to hire professionals. They'd waited for the worst storm of winter, thinking to catch Caleb and Eleanor vulnerable. Instead, the mountain had judged them first. "Sullivan's dead," Pete said dully. "Went into the water with his horse. Tom Brennan, too." Eleanor felt no satisfaction at the news, only a deep sadness. So much death, so much waste, all because of fear and prejudice. That night, with the survivors sleeping fitfully by the fire, Eleanor and Caleb sat close together, processing the day's events. "They'll have to go back," Eleanor said. "Tell everyone what happened here. Are you afraid they'll lie? Say we caused the bridge collapse?" She shook her head. "Pete won't lie. I saw it in his eyes. He knows what we did for him." She paused, gathering courage for her next words. "Caleb, I want to go with them." He stiffened. "Eleanor." "Not to stay," she said quickly, "but to face them. All of them. To show them that their ugly bride isn't hiding anymore." Caleb studied her face in the firelight. The scar was still there, of course, but he truly didn't see it anymore. All he saw was courage and grace and a strength that humbled him. "All right," he said finally. "We'll go together." The journey back to Willow Creek took 3 days. Pete and Frank, still weak but mobile, rode ahead to prepare the town. Eleanor and Caleb followed at a steady pace, the wolves shadowing them through the trees until they reached the valley's edge. Word of their coming spread like wildfire. By the time they rode down Main Street, the entire town had gathered. Eleanor kept her head high, her bonnet pushed back, meeting every stare directly. Sheriff Williams was waiting at his office, along with Mayor Hutchins and Reverend Cooper. Pete Morrison stood with them, his young face aged by his ordeal. "Tell them," Williams said simply. Pete's voice shook, but his words were clear. He told of the planned attack, the bridge collapse, the night of terror in the icy water. Most of all, he told of the woman he'd tormented, pulling him to safety, of the man he'd tried to kill, risking everything to save his worthless life. "I was wrong," Pete finished, looking directly at Eleanor. "We all were. You're not cursed. We are cursed with hatred and fear and stupidity." His voice broke. "I'm sorry. God help me. I'm so sorry." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Mrs." Patterson pushed forward, her face twisted with familiar disdain. "This changes nothing," she spat. "She's still marked. Still what?" Eleanor stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly. "Still scarred? Yes. Still different? Always. But still human? Still deserving of basic dignity? That never changed. Only your ability to see it." She turned to address the wider crowd. "I'm not asking for your love or even your friendship, but I am demanding your respect, not because of what Caleb and I did at the bridge, but because I'm a person, not a monster from your nightmares." Someone near the back started clapping slowly. Mary Chen stepped forward, head high despite the looks she received. Her father joined her. Then the sheriff, then others, not many, but enough. "You're not welcome here, Mrs." Patterson said coldly. "Heroes or not." "I know," Eleanor replied, "but that's your loss, not mine. I have a home, a life, a man who loves me exactly as I am. What do you have except your bitterness?" She turned to Caleb, who'd remained silent throughout. "Let's go home." As they prepared to leave, Reverend Cooper approached hesitantly. "Miss Hartley, Mr. McAllister." "Wait." He pulled a worn Bible from his coat. "I've failed in my calling. I preached love while allowing hatred to flourish in my congregation. If you ever wanted to make your union official before God." Eleanor looked at Caleb, a question in her eyes. He smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made her heart soar. "What do you think?" he asked. "Want to trade ugly bride for just bride?" "Yes," she said simply. They were married that afternoon in the small church, with Sheriff Williams and the Chen family as witnesses. Eleanor wore her everyday dress, her scar uncovered, her face radiant with joy. When Reverend Cooper pronounced them husband and wife, and Caleb kissed her with tender reverence, Mary Chen burst into happy tears. They left Willow Creek as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. This time, Eleanor didn't look back. She'd found closure, had faced her demons and emerged victorious. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked as they climbed toward Thunder Mountain. "Only one," Eleanor said, smiling. "I wish I'd met you sooner." High above, a wolf howled, not in warning now, but in welcome. The mountain had judged them worthy. These two scarred souls who'd found beauty in each other's broken places. The ugly bride was gone forever. In her place rode Eleanor McAllister, wolf friend, mountain woman, beloved wife. The transformation was complete, as inevitable as winter giving way to spring, as perfect as the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Behind them, Willow Creek grappled with its conscience. Some hearts had been changed, others remained frozen. But the story of the ugly bride who'd saved her tormentors would be told and retold, growing into legend, a reminder that sometimes the real monsters were the ones we created with our fear and ignorance. And in a cabin high on Thunder Mountain, two people who'd thought themselves unworthy of love proved every day that beauty wasn't about perfect faces or unmarked skin. It was about the choice to see with the heart instead of the eyes, to kiss scars instead of turning away, to build a life together in defiance of a world that would keep them apart. Spring came to Thunder Mountain in a rush of melting snow and wildflowers. The meadow below their cabin exploded with color Indian paintbrush, columbine, and mountain daisies, creating a tapestry that took Eleanor's breath away. She stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Caleb work on the new addition that would serve as a nursery. 5 years had passed since that winter night when they'd saved their enemies from the icy creek. 5 years of seasons turning, of love deepening, of a life built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and tenderness. The news of their child had come with the first snow of winter, and now, as spring bloomed around them, they prepared for this new chapter. "You should be resting," Caleb called, noticing her in the doorway. "I've been resting all morning," Eleanor replied, stepping into the sunshine. "Besides, someone needs to supervise your carpentry." He grinned, setting down his hammer to wrap his arms around her from behind, his hands gentle on her belly. "Is that so? And what does my supervisor think of the work?" "I think," she said, leaning back into his embrace, "that our child will have the finest nursery on Thunder Mountain." "The only nursery on Thunder Mountain," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Caleb tensed automatically. Old habits died hard, but relaxed when he saw who it was. Mary Chen rode beside a young man Eleanor recognized as Dr. Samuel Hart, newly arrived from Philadelphia to take over old Doc Morrison's practice. "Mrs. McAllister," Mary called, dismounting gracefully. "I've brought Dr. Hart as promised." Over the years, Mary had become Eleanor's dearest friend, making the journey to the mountain whenever she could escape her duties at her father's expanded store. The town's attitudes had slowly shifted, not entirely, but enough that the Chen family had prospered, and Mary had even started teaching at the school. Dr. Hart approached with professional courtesy, his young face serious. "Mrs. McAllister, I'm honored to attend you. Miss Chen has told me much about you." Eleanor submitted to his examination, amused by his careful avoidance of her scarred side until she gently turned his chin. "Doctor, if you're going to deliver my baby, you need to see all of me. The scar doesn't bite." He flushed but met her eyes. "My apologies. It's just, in medical school, they taught us that facial disfigurements could indicate deeper problems, affect childbearing." He shook his head. "But I can see that's nonsense. You're remarkably healthy, Mrs. McAllister." "Mountain living agrees with me," Eleanor said simply, as the doctor completed his examination, declaring both mother and baby in excellent health. Mary regaled them with town gossip. Pete Morrison had married the schoolteacher and seemed determined to atone for his past through good works. Mrs. Patterson had moved back east to live with her sister. New families had arrived, drawn by the railroad's expansion, diluting the old prejudices with fresh perspectives. "And," Mary added with a meaningful look, "there's talk of building a new school closer to the mountain communities. They're looking for a teacher." Eleanor's hand went to her belly. "I have other plans for the near future. Of course, but perhaps later." After their guests departed with promises to return when Eleanor's time came, she and Caleb walked to their favorite spot, a flat rock overlooking the valley where they often sat to watch the sunset. The wolves were visible on a distant ridge, the pack now including several generations of pups they'd watched grow to adulthood. "A teacher," Caleb mused. "You'd be good at it. Maybe when our little one is older." Eleanor smiled. "Can you imagine? The ugly bride teaching the town's children? My beautiful wife teaching lucky children, he corrected firmly. Even after all these years, he never let the old cruel nickname pass unchallenged. As they sat in comfortable silence, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The pain of her past hadn't disappeared. The scar remained, as did the memories of loneliness and cruelty, but they'd been transformed into something else. Strength, empathy, the ability to see beauty in broken things. The sun was setting when the first pain came. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Eleanor. Caleb's voice was sharp with concern. I think, she said breathlessly, our child has decided to arrive. The hours that followed blurred together, Caleb's steady presence, his sure hands that had delivered countless animals now gentle with her pain. He'd wanted to ride for the doctor, but Eleanor had refused to let him leave her side. We've faced worse than this together, she panted between contractions. We can handle one small baby. Not so small, Caleb muttered, but his touch remained gentle, his voice calm as he coached her through each wave, as dawn broke over Thunder Mountain, painting the peaks in rose and gold. A new cry joined the symphony of the wilderness. Eleanor, exhausted but triumphant, cradled their daughter, perfect, pink, and blessedly healthy. She's beautiful, Caleb breathed, his finger traced by a tiny fist. Does she? Eleanor hesitated. Is her face? Perfect, Caleb said firmly. Just like her mother's. Eleanor smiled through her tears, understanding what he meant. Their daughter's face was unmarked, but it wouldn't have mattered if it weren't. She would grow up knowing she was loved, valued, beautiful in all the ways that truly mattered. They named her Hope. As Eleanor recovered, visitors came. Mary and Dr. Hart. Sheriff Williams, now gray-haired but still keeping the peace. Even Pete Morrison with his pregnant wife. Each visitor brought gifts and stayed to admire the baby, who seemed remarkably unimpressed by the attention. She has your eyes, Mary told Eleanor, and Caleb's stubborn chin. Poor child. Eleanor laughed, then grew serious. Mary, I've been thinking about your offer, the teaching position. Mary's face lit up. Really? When Hope is older, yes, these mountain families need education too. And perhaps, Eleanor glanced at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. Perhaps it's time to show that the ugly bride became something more. 3 years later, Eleanor stood before a classroom in the new mountain community school. 20 children faced her, ranging from tiny Ruth Morrison to strapping 15-year-old Jakob Lindstrom. Some were from town families who'd moved to the mountain valleys for farming. Others were children of trappers and miners who'd never had formal schooling. On her hip, Hope played with her mother's braid, completely at ease. At 3, she was fearless and bright, equally comfortable with her father's rifles and her mother's books. The wolves knew her scent and had been seen watching over her when she played outside. Good morning, class, Eleanor said, her voice clear and warm. Today we're going to read a story about courage. As she opened the book, one of many donated by supporters in town and beyond, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. The scar was still there, always would be, but it no longer defined her. She was Mrs. Eleanor McAllister, wife, mother, teacher, survivor. The girl who'd been mocked as the ugly bride had become a woman who taught children that beauty came in many forms, that kindness mattered more than appearance, that courage meant standing up for what was right even when the whole world stood against you. Once upon a time, she began, Hope settling quietly against her shoulder. There was a girl who thought she was a monster. The children leaned forward, captivated, and Eleanor smiled, knowing that each story she told, each lesson she taught, was another strike against the ignorance and cruelty that had once nearly destroyed her. Outside, Caleb worked with the older boys, teaching them to read trail sign and respect the wilderness. Their eyes met through the window, and he winked, that private gesture that still made her heart race after all these years. As Eleanor continued the story, weaving in lessons about acceptance and courage, she thought about the girl she'd been, hiding behind bonnets, accepting the name Ugly Bride as her identity. That girl had been transformed by love. Not just Caleb's love, but her own growing self-acceptance. The mountains had given her sanctuary, but she'd built her own strength. The man who'd seen beyond the monster had shown her the way, but she'd walked the path herself. And now, she was passing that gift to others, the knowledge that everyone deserved to be seen, truly seen, for who they were inside. And did they live happily ever after? Little Ruth asked as the story concluded. Eleanor looked at her daughter, at her students, at her husband visible through the window. She thought of their cabin filled with laughter, of wolf songs under starlight, of the way Caleb still kissed her scar each morning as if it were precious. Yes, she said softly. Not perfectly, not without challenges, but happily, because they chose to see beauty where others saw only ugliness. They chose love over fear. The bell rang for recess, and the children scattered like seeds on the wind. Hope toddled after them, already showing signs of her mother's quiet strength and her father's fierce protectiveness. Eleanor stepped onto the schoolhouse porch, breathing in the pine-scented air. In the distance, Thunder Mountain rose majestically, its peaks touching the sky. Somewhere up there, their cabin waited, their sanctuary, their beginning, their home. She'd been the ugly bride once, scorned and mocked by those who couldn't see past the surface. But here, now, she was simply Eleanor, teacher, mother, wife, woman. The transformation was complete, as natural as winter giving way to spring, as inevitable as the sunrise painting the mountains in shades of gold. And in that moment, with her daughter's laughter ringing across the meadow and her husband's steady presence nearby, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that every scar, every tear, every moment of pain had been worth it. They'd led her here, to this life she'd never dared dream of, to a love that saw beauty in broken places and called it perfect. The ugly bride was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who taught others to find theirs, who faced each day with courage and grace. And that, Eleanor thought with a smile, was the happiest ending of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and transformation in the Wild West. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of the American frontier, and share what touched your heart in this story of the ugly bride who found beauty in the most unexpected place. Your comments and experiences make our storytelling community special.